Andre Johnson had lived in Willow Creek Estates for only 6 months, but already he had learned what kind of place it was. The lawns were perfect, the driveways pressure-washed, and the mailboxes painted in identical shades of dull beige. On the surface, it looked like the picture of suburban peace. But beneath the neatly trimmed hedges and cookie-cutter smiles, there was a current of control, one that flowed straight from Paula Henderson, the HOA president. Paula was the type of woman who carried her clipboard like a badge of authority. She didn't just enforce rules, she thrived on them. Every minor infraction, every misplaced trash can, every lawn that grew an inch too high gave her purpose. And when she spotted Andre walking to his mailbox in his camouflage jacket, she saw not just a neighbor, but a target. That jacket wasn't just fabric. For Andre, it was a second skin, a reminder of years spent in deserts and jungles, a reminder of men he'd fought beside, and men he'd buried. It carried the dust of places Paula couldn't pronounce and the weight of promises she couldn't imagine. He didn't wear it to stand out. He wore it to stay connected to a part of himself that civilian life often tried to erase. The confrontation began on a crisp Saturday morning. The sun had barely climbed past the rooftops when Andre stepped outside, coffee mug in hand, jacket zipped halfway up against the breeze. He strolled casually toward his mailbox, unaware that Paula had been watching from across the street. She pounced. "Mr. Johnson." Her voice cut through the quiet like a police siren. She marched across the road, heels clicking sharply against the pavement, clipboard clutched to her chest. "We need to have a word." Andre raised an eyebrow but stayed calm. "Morning, Paula." "Something wrong?" Paula's lips tightened. "Yes, actually. Your attire. That jacket is not appropriate for our community. We have standards here." Andre blinked, almost amused. "My jacket?" He glanced down at the camo, then back at her. "This is military issue. It's a part of who I am." Paula sniffed. "Be that as it may, Willow Creek has guidelines. Military fatigues, camouflage, anything aggressive, it doesn't fit the image we're trying to maintain. We're a peaceful community, Mr. Johnson. That," she gestured at his jacket like it was a weapon, "sends the wrong message." Andre took a slow sip of his coffee, his composure steady. "The only message this jacket sends is that I served my country. That I bled for it. That my friends died wearing the same thing. You call that the wrong message?" Neighbors began to peek from their windows, curiosity pulling them to the scene. Some whispered behind curtains, others froze in their yards, pretending to water plants but listening intently. Paula thrived on the audience. "Look," she said, voice sharp but sugary. "We all appreciate your service. But rules are rules. If I let you wear that, next thing you know someone will be painting their house neon green or parking an RV in the driveway. Where does it end?" Andre's jaw tightened. He wasn't a man who liked confrontation, but he wasn't one to back down either. He set his coffee mug on the mailbox and met Paula's eyes. "It ends where respect begins. You don't get to strip me of who I am because it makes you uncomfortable. This jacket stays." The street seemed to hold its breath. Paula's face flushed red, a mix of anger and embarrassment. No one had ever spoken back to her so directly. She leaned closer, lowering her voice but sharpening her words. "You'll regret defying me, Mr. Johnson. I run this neighborhood. And no uniform, past or present, gives you immunity from the rules." Andre didn't flinch. He simply picked up his coffee, gave her a polite nod, and turned back toward his porch. His calm dismissal burned hotter than any insult. Paula stood frozen, humiliated, as the quiet murmur of neighbors spread. What she didn't know then was that this was no ordinary disagreement over a jacket. This was the spark. The moment that would light a fire neither she nor her clipboard could contain. And for the first time in a long while, Andre felt the stirrings of a different kind of battle. By Monday morning, Andre's mailbox was no longer just a mailbox, it was a battlefield marker. The confrontation with Paula had already taken on a life of its own. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, whispered over hedges and passed in hushed tones during morning walks. Some neighbors respected Andre's quiet defiance. Others, terrified of Paula's wrath, avoided even looking in his direction. But Paula herself? She was seething. For a woman like her, control wasn't optional, it was oxygen. And Andre's refusal to bow had publicly chipped away at her authority. She couldn't let that stand. Inside her immaculately staged living room, Paula drafted a formal complaint on Willow Creek HOA letterhead. Every word was carefully chosen, dripping with self-importance. Mr. Johnson's repeated violation of community standards has created a hostile atmosphere that threatens the harmony of Willow Creek Estates. She even bolded the word hostile for dramatic effect. The notice was slipped into Andre's mailbox the next morning, neatly folded and signed with Paula's looping signature. But she didn't stop there. By midday, she was on the neighborhood group chat, her words disguised as polite concern. "I know we all respect our veterans, but we can't allow military apparel that frightens children or disrupts the peaceful image of our community." The subtext was clear. Paula was positioning Andre not as a neighbor, but as a problem. Andre read the letter once, then set it aside on his kitchen counter. He wasn't surprised. Years in uniform had taught him to spot escalation a mile away. Paula wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The days that followed proved him right. A neighbor who usually waved stopped making eye contact. Another, who used to chat about football, mumbled an excuse and hurried inside when Andre approached. It wasn't personal, they weren't suddenly his enemies. They were just afraid. Afraid of Paula's reach. Andre recognized the tactic instantly. It was the same strategy bullies used in every environment: divide and isolate. Paula wanted him cut off, alone, easier to break. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sun dip behind the houses, Andre noticed Paula making her rounds. Clipboard in hand, she inspected lawns, peered at trash bins, scribbled down infractions that probably didn't exist. But every so often, her eyes flicked toward Andre's porch, lingering on that camo jacket draped over the chair beside him. Her smile was smug. She believed time was on her side. But Paula had made one miscalculation: Andre was no ordinary neighbor. He had endured worse than petty harassment. He had faced desert nights filled with gunfire, missions where silence was survival, and enemies who didn't play by any rules at all. Compared to that, Paula and her clipboard were almost laughable. Almost. Andre stayed quiet, but not passive. Each letter she sent, each neighbor she turned, only steeled his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for a jacket anymore. He was fighting for dignity, for the principle that no one, not even an HOA president drunk on power, could erase his identity. One afternoon, Paula finally confronted him again. This time, she came prepared with her papers in hand, her voice booming across the yard so the entire street could hear. "Mr. Johnson, this is your second notice. Failure to comply will result in fines, legal action, and possible removal from the community." Andre looked up from the porch, expression unreadable. Neighbors peeked from blinds, tension buzzing in the air. "Fines?" Andre asked evenly. "For wearing a jacket?" Paula smirked. "For refusing to follow rules. You think you're special, but this community doesn't bend for anyone." Andre leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his voice calm but carrying. "You think this is about rules?" "No, Paula. This is about respect. And you're running out of it." The street went silent. For a heartbeat, even Paula faltered. But then she laughed, sharp and cold. "We'll see about that." She spun on her heel, marching away, heels clicking like war drums. Andre watched her go, his jaw tightening. He could see where this was headed. She wasn't going to stop until she either broke him, or he broke her hold. As the porch light flicked on behind him, Andre pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over a name in his contacts list. A name he hadn't dialed in years. He didn't press call yet. But soon. Very soon. The neighborhood had always seemed friendly when Andre first moved in. People waved as they walked their dogs, kids played hopscotch on the sidewalks, and neighbors stopped by with welcome baskets. But after Paula's crusade against his jacket began, that warmth started to disappear, slowly at first, then all at once. The morning jogger who usually gave him a cheerful good morning, now kept her eyes glued to the pavement. The neighbor who once asked him to help move furniture suddenly claimed he'd hired movers. Parents pulled their kids closer when Andre passed, as if the sight of camouflage fabric made him dangerous. Andre noticed it all, but he didn't blame them. Fear was contagious, and Paula was an expert at spreading it. She used the neighborhood group chat like a weapon, posting vague but poisonous comments. We need to make sure our community stays safe and welcoming for children. Some people forget that rules exist for a reason. It only takes one person to bring down the entire image of Willow Creek. Everyone knew who she was talking about. Andre responded the only way he knew how: silence. He didn't argue online, didn't knock on doors to plead his case. He simply lived his life. Coffee on the porch in the mornings. Jogging around the block in the evenings. His jacket always hanging nearby, as much a part of his daily routine as breathing. But silence has a price. Days stretched into weeks, and the isolation deepened. Invitations that once landed in his mailbox, barbecues, block parties, game nights, vanished. Andre's porch light glowed alone while laughter spilled from other houses. He'd been through loneliness before, stationed in hostile places thousands of miles from home. But this was different. This wasn't war, it was home. And home was supposed to feel safe. One Friday evening, as Andre grilled chicken on his back patio, he overheard voices drifting over the fence. "Why doesn't he just take the jacket off?" a woman whispered. "Because he thinks the rules don't apply to him," another replied. "My husband says Paula's right. He makes the place feel tense." Andre clenched the tongs in his hand, staring at the glowing coals. He had fought for the right of those voices to speak freely, yet hearing them sting with judgment twisted like a knife. Still, he said nothing. Because Andre understood something Paula never would: silence could be its own weapon. While she spent her energy trying to bend him, he conserved his strength. But silence also left him time to think. To plan. That night, Andre sat on his porch, the jacket draped over his shoulders, the weight of it grounding him. He scrolled through old photos on his phone, faces of men grinning in dusty helmets, arms slung over each other, eyes tired but proud. Brothers. A bond forged not in manicured suburbs, but in fire. He stopped at one photo, his Special Forces unit standing together after a grueling mission. They looked battered, filthy, exhausted. But in their eyes was something Paula could never manufacture with her rules: unity. Andre's thumb hovered over a name in his contacts: Marcus Hawk Hawkins, his old team sergeant. The man who could command respect with just a glance. The man who had dragged Andre out of danger more than once. Andre didn't press call. Not yet. But the idea of reaching out settled deep in his chest. If Paula wanted a war of intimidation, she was about to learn what true intimidation looked like. The next day, Paula delivered her third notice. She didn't even bother hiding her smirk as she slipped the envelope into his mailbox while neighbors watched. It was theater for her, a performance of power. But Andre only watched from the porch, calm, unshaken. He didn't open the letter. He didn't need to. He already knew what it said. Because the battle Paula thought she was winning wasn't really being fought on paper. Andre was waiting. And when the time came, he wouldn't be standing alone. By the time the fourth notice arrived, Andre didn't even bother to open it. The envelope sat untouched on his kitchen counter, its neat lettering and HOA logo a symbol of Paula's obsession. She had escalated from warnings to threats of legal action, citing continued defiance and willful disruption of community harmony. Andre just shook his head. Paula had no idea what real disruption looked like. That evening, he sat on his porch as the sun sank behind the rooftops, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. The camo jacket hung heavy on his shoulders, its weight as familiar as the rifle he'd once carried. He stared at the phone in his hand, thumb hovering over a name he hadn't dialed in years. Marcus Hawk Hawkins. His old sergeant. His brother. Andre hesitated, memories pressing in. The last time he and Hawk had spoken was at a funeral, another folded flag, another goodbye. Life had scattered the unit across states and careers. Some worked in security, some in training, others living quiet lives like Andre. But their bond had never dissolved. It couldn't. Bonds forged in battle were permanent. Finally, Andre pressed the call button. The line rang twice. Then a voice, gravelly but strong, filled his ear. Johnson? That really you, brother? Andre closed his eyes, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Yeah, Hawk. It's me. A pause, then laughter, deep, genuine, the kind only shared between men who had faced death together. Damn. I thought you dropped off the map. What's going on? Andre leaned back in his chair, watching the first stars flicker to life above. Got myself a situation. Not overseas this time, right here in the suburbs. He explained everything. The jacket. Paula's demands. The notices. The way neighbors avoided him like he was a threat. When he finished, silence hung on the line for a beat. Then Hawk spoke, his tone shifting from humor to steel. She's trying to erase you. After everything you gave for this country? No. Not happening. Andre exhaled slowly. Didn't call to stir trouble. Just needed to hear a familiar voice. Brother, Hawk said firmly, you don't have to fight this alone. You never did. The next day, Hawk made a few calls of his own. Old numbers, old ties. Men who owed each other more than words could ever repay. And just like that, the wheels began turning. Within a week, Willow Creek Estates would no longer be just Paula's stage. It started with the rumble of engines. On a quiet Saturday morning, the sound rolled down the streets, low, steady, unmistakable. Neighbors peeked out their windows as a line of trucks and motorcycles pulled into the neighborhood, sunlight glinting off polished chrome. Doors opened. Boots hit pavement. And out stepped men built like walls, their postures straight, their eyes sharp. They weren't in uniform, but they didn't need to be. Their presence alone commanded respect. Some wore leather vests patched with unit insignias, others simple jeans and t-shirts. But every one of them carried the same look, the look of warriors who had seen and survived more than Paula could dream of. At their front was Hawk. Broad-shouldered, gray streaking his beard, his presence radiated quiet authority. He clasped Andre in a crushing embrace the moment he saw him. Brothers don't let brothers stand alone, Hawk said, his voice low but steady. Andre felt the weight lift from his chest. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't isolated. He wasn't the lone target of Paula's campaign. His unit was here. His family. From across the street, Paula emerged from her house, clipboard in hand, her eyes narrowing at the sight. She had expected compliance, maybe quiet defeat. She hadn't expected this. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers as blinds shifted and doors cracked open. Willow Creek was about to witness something it had never seen before. Paula tightened her grip on her clipboard, masking the flicker of unease in her eyes. But the tremor in her step betrayed her. For the first time since this war began, she wasn't the one in control. And Andre knew this was only the beginning. The sound of engines carried long before the convoy came into view. It wasn't the frantic roar of teenagers revving motorcycles or the smooth hum of luxury cars. This was something deeper, measured, disciplined, like a war drum rolling across the quiet streets of Willow Creek Estates. Curtains twitched. Garage doors paused halfway down as neighbors leaned out to listen. Even the dogs, normally barking at every delivery truck, fell silent. Then, they appeared. A line of trucks, SUVs, and motorcycles rounded the corner, gleaming in the morning sun. Flags, American, unit insignias, POW, MIA, fluttered in the breeze. At least a dozen men, maybe more, rolled slowly down the manicured street, their presence undeniable. Andre stood on his porch, arms crossed, expression calm but eyes burning with something fierce. For weeks, he had been painted as a problem. Today, the truth arrived in steel and boot leather. The vehicles parked in formation along the curb, not haphazardly, but with the precision of men who still carried military discipline in their bones. Doors opened. Boots hit pavement. And out stepped his brothers. They weren't in uniform, but they didn't need one. Their bearing said it all. Broad shoulders, upright posture, eyes that scanned every detail of their surroundings. Some wore jeans and leather jackets patched with unit emblems, others plain black t-shirts stretched across muscular frames. A few carried the weight of age in gray beards and weathered faces, but their presence was no less formidable. At the front was Hawk. He moved with the same steady authority he had on deployment, every step measured, unhurried, commanding. When Hawk reached the porch, he didn't say a word at first. He simply clasped Andre's hand, then pulled him into a firm embrace. The kind of hug that didn't just greet, it anchored. "Brothers don't let brothers stand alone," Hawk said, his voice deep and carrying. Andre nodded. His silence spoke volumes. From across the street, Paula Henderson's front door creaked open. She emerged with her ever-present clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. Her heels clicked as she marched toward the scene, but her steps weren't quite as sharp as usual. The smirk she wore faltered when she realized just how many men now stood shoulder to shoulder with Andre. Her eyes darted from face to face. Not one of them looked away. Their stares weren't hostile, but they were steady, unyielding. The kind of look that stripped away pretense and exposed truth. Paula cleared her throat, trying to inject authority into her voice. What is all this? You can't just... Hawk turned his head slightly, fixing her with a calm but piercing gaze. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Ma'am, we're here for our brother. That's all you need to know." The words, simple as they were, landed heavier than any shouted threat. The neighbors began to emerge from their homes. First cautiously, then more boldly. A man across the street stepped onto his lawn, arms folded. A young couple whispered at the edge of their driveway. Children peeked from behind their parents, wide-eyed at the sight of men who looked like they'd walked straight out of a movie. But this wasn't Hollywood. This was real. Andre stood a little taller as he looked around. For weeks, Paula had made him the villain. But now, with his brothers behind him, the narrative was shifting. He wasn't alone. He was the center of a force Paula couldn't manipulate or intimidate. Paula's lips thinned. She lifted her clipboard as though it were a shield. "This is a private community," she snapped. "We have standards, rules." Before she could finish, another veteran stepped forward, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of command. "Lady, we live through places with no rules, no safety, no mercy. Don't lecture us about rules." The street went silent. Paula opened her mouth, then shut it again. For the first time, the authority she wielded like a weapon seemed flimsy, paper against steel. Andre's eyes swept over his brothers, then the neighbors who watched. He didn't need to speak. His very presence, flanked by men who had bled beside him, said everything. This wasn't about a jacket anymore. It was about respect. And the balance of power in Willow Creek had just shifted. Paula Henderson's heels clacked across the concrete like a metronome of misplaced confidence. Clipboard clutched to her chest, chin high, she strutted toward Andre's porch as though she could erase the line of battle-hardened men with the stroke of a pen. But she wasn't facing late HOA dues this time. She was staring down Special Forces veterans who had stared into the face of war and come back unbroken. Andre remained on his porch, steady as a stone. Hawk stood beside him, arms crossed, silent as a sentinel. The rest of the men fanned out around the yard, forming an unspoken wall. They didn't touch Paula, didn't move toward her, but their mere presence narrowed her world to a tunnel with Andre at the end of it. Mr. Williams, she began, her voice louder than necessary, meant for the gathering neighbors as much as for him. This display, these people, it violates community standards. You cannot bring this kind of disturbance into Willow Creek. A ripple of amusement passed through the veterans. One of them, a tall, bald man with tattoos climbing his arms, chuckled under his breath. Disturbance? Lady, this is discipline. Paula's eyes flicked toward him, but she didn't dare engage. Instead, she adjusted her blazer and tried to keep her composure. We are a community built on rules, order, and appearance. Your costume, she sneered at Andre's camouflage jacket, is already in violation. And now this circus of vehicles and strangers only proves my point. Andre's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Hawk spoke. His voice was calm, deliberate. Ma'am, that costume isn't fashion. It's the uniform of men who fought so you could live in a place like this, safe and free to complain about lawns and mailboxes. A murmur rippled through the watching neighbors. Paula's face flushed crimson. She snapped back, desperate to reclaim control. I don't care who you think you are. In this neighborhood, I enforce the rules. And if you can't comply, I will see to it personally that you are fined, sanctioned, or even evicted. The veterans didn't flinch. They didn't laugh. They just stared at her with a silence heavier than any outburst. It was the kind of silence that made people squirm, the kind that said they'd been through worse threats than this and come out stronger. Andre finally stepped forward, his boots hitting the porch with a measured weight. His voice carried, not loud, but steady, like a drumbeat. You think this is about rules? No, Paula. This is about respect. You've disrespected me, my service, and now my brothers. That ends today. The crowd thickened, neighbors leaning on fences, standing in clusters at the ends of driveways. Cell phones rose, recording the standoff. Willow Creek had turned into a stage, and Paula was suddenly aware that every word she spoke was being preserved. Respect, she scoffed, though her voice wavered. Respect is earned. And parading around in combat gear like some kind of thug doesn't earn you anything. That did it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman down the street shook her head in disgust. A man muttered, "She's gone too far." Andre's eyes hardened, but he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he unzipped the jacket just enough to reveal the neatly folded patches stitched into the lining, badges of campaigns, commendations, a bronze star gleaming in the light. I didn't earn respect with words, Paula, he said, his voice deep with gravity. I earned it by bleeding for a flag that lets you stand there and insult me. Paula faltered. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The words she usually wielded like weapons now slipped uselessly through her fingers. Hawk stepped forward, his presence cutting like a blade. You're out of your depth, lady. You don't get to lecture warriors about respect. Not here. Not today. The silence that followed was suffocating. Paula looked around, searching for support, but found only cold stares and disapproving eyes from the very neighbors she once commanded. Andre didn't move, didn't shout, didn't gloat. He just stood firm, flanked by his unit, the living embodiment of dignity under fire. And in that moment, everyone watching knew, Paula's reign over Willow Creek had just been broken. Paula Henderson's face burned as whispers spread through the gathering crowd. Her clipboard trembled in her grip, the authority she once carried melting under the stares of disapproving neighbors and the unwavering presence of Andre's Special Forces brothers. But Paula wasn't done. No, she had one card left to play, the one she always relied on when her grip on power slipped. She pulled out her phone. I warned you, Mr. Williams, she snapped, punching numbers furiously. If you won't listen to the HOA, then you'll listen to the law. The neighbors muttered. A few shook their heads. One man groaned, "Oh, here we go." Andre stood still, unbothered. Hawk leaned closer, his voice low and calm. Let her call. Truth has a way of cutting through lies. Paula's voice rang out as she spoke into the phone, exaggerated for the audience. Yes. Hello? This is Willow Creek Estates. There's a large group of aggressive men outside my home. They're blocking the street, threatening me. Please, send officers quickly. Gasps rose. Neighbors looked around, seeing the reality. The men weren't shouting, weren't pushing, weren't even moving. They stood calmly, silently, like sentinels. But Paula's words painted a picture of danger that didn't exist. Andre's fists clenched at his sides, but Hawk placed a hand on his shoulder. Steady, brother. We faced worse than this. Minutes later, the sound of sirens grew in the distance. Red and blue lights flickered off the windows as two patrol cars rolled into the cul-de-sac. The crowd shifted, parting as the vehicles stopped. Paula straightened her blazer, relief flashing across her face. She smirked, certain victory was in sight. Officers, she shouted, hurrying toward them with theatrical distress. Thank goodness you're here. These men are trespassing, harassing me, and disturbing the peace. Look at them, intimidating the entire neighborhood. The two officers, one older and stocky, the other younger and sharp-eyed, stepped out and scanned the scene. Their eyes didn't land on Paula first. They landed on Andre. And instantly, something changed. The younger officer froze, recognition dawning. His eyes widened, and his posture shifted from stiff to respectful. Staff Sergeant Williams? The crowd stirred. Paula blinked in confusion. What? You know him? The older officer walked closer, a slow grin spreading across his face. Know him? Lady, this man's a decorated war hero. He served with my cousin overseas. He extended a hand to Andre. Good to see you again, Sergeant. Didn't expect to find you here. Andre clasped his hand firmly, nodding with quiet respect. Good to see you too, officer. The veterans behind him straightened slightly, their presence no longer just intimidating, it was recognized. Legitimate. Paula's mouth dropped. But he's violating HOA rules. Look at this chaos. The older officer turned toward her, his expression flat. Ma'am, all I see are some men standing on private property, minding their business. Nobody's broken any laws here. The younger officer added, frankly, ma'am, it looks like you wasted our time. The neighbors chuckled softly, the tension easing. Phones recorded every word, every reaction. Paula's face twisted, desperation clawing at her. You don't understand, she snapped. They're dangerous. Look at them. The officer's voice hardened. The only dangerous thing here, ma'am, is false reporting. You just tried to weaponize us against a veteran and his brothers. That doesn't sit right with me. Gasps shot through the crowd again. Paula's confidence crumbled. She clutched her clipboard like a shield, backing away under the weight of dozens of eyes. Andre remained calm, standing tall. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to argue. The truth was speaking for him now, through his brothers, through the officers, through the neighbors who saw it all unfold. The older officer clapped Andre on the shoulder. You've got nothing to worry about here. We'll be filing our report, but I think it's pretty clear who the problem is. All eyes turned back to Paula. She stood frozen, red-faced, breathing hard, as the once silent neighborhood now buzzed with murmurs of disapproval. And for the first time, the queen of the HOA realized her crown was slipping. The sirens faded into silence, but the tension in Willow Creek Estates remained thick as smoke. The two officers leaned casually near their patrol cars, unconcerned. The veteran stood firm, calm but unyielding. And at the center of it all, Paula Henderson gripped her clipboard so tightly her knuckles went white. Her world, the one where she ruled the neighborhood like a queen, was collapsing. And everyone knew it. Ma'am, the older officer said firmly, you need to go back inside. This isn't harassment. This isn't a crime. It's neighbors standing together. If you keep escalating, you're the one we'll have to remove. The crowd murmured in agreement. Some even nodded. Paula's lips trembled as she looked around. The neighbors she once controlled with fines and threats no longer avoided her gaze. They stared back, unimpressed, some even smirking at her flustered state. She tried to rally, forcing her voice louder. "You don't understand. If we let this go, then our neighborhood, our standards, will crumble. What's next? Motorcycles on lawns? Flags on rooftops? This is chaos." "Chaos?" A neighbor's voice cut through the air. It was Mrs. Ruiz, a retired teacher who rarely spoke during HOA meetings. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "What's chaos is you harassing people who served our country. What's chaos is treating your neighbors like criminals for living their lives." Others nodded. Mr. Patel, the quiet man with a garden everyone admired, raised his voice too. "I've lived here 12 years. I've paid every HOA fee on time. And I'm tired of being bullied. She doesn't speak for us." The crowd thickened, emboldened. Murmurs turned to voices, voices to agreement, agreement to a swell of unity Paula had never faced before. Andre stood still, saying nothing, letting it unfold. His silence was more powerful than any speech. His brothers flanked him, their very presence a reminder of sacrifice and brotherhood. Paula's face crumbled. The clipboard she once wielded like a weapon now dangled uselessly at her side. You can't do this," she stammered. "I'm the president of this HOA. I make the rules." Hawk stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "No. You enforce rules. But leadership? Leadership is about respect. And you lost that the moment you disrespected him." He nodded toward Andre. The younger officer chimed in, his words cutting like a blade. "Ma'am, authority without respect isn't leadership. It's control. And control never lasts." Gasps and nods spread through the crowd. Cell phones captured every second. Paula's empire of intimidation was disintegrating, pixel by pixel, as neighbors live-streamed her downfall. Andre finally spoke, his deep voice calm, steady, unshakable. "Paula, I didn't move here for conflict. I moved here for peace. I wore that jacket because it's a part of me. It represents the blood, sweat, and sacrifice it took to give you the very freedom you abuse. I don't need your permission to honor that. And I never will." Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy kind, the kind that leaves no room for rebuttal. Paula's eyes darted desperately, but there was no rescue. Not from the cops. Not from the neighbors. Not from her clipboard of rules and fines. She turned, trembling, and stumbled back toward her house. The door slammed shut behind her. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in a swell of relief. Conversations buzzed. Neighbors clapped Andre on the shoulder, shook hands with his brothers, whispered thanks. The tide had shifted. The officers gave Andre a respectful nod before leaving. One even saluted quietly as he stepped into his car. Andre looked to his unit. Hawk gave a small grin. Mission accomplished. The veterans filed back to their vehicles, engines roaring to life, flags snapping in the breeze. They didn't peel out. They didn't leave in chaos. They departed with the same discipline they arrived with, measured, steady, unstoppable. And when the street fell quiet again, Andre stood on his porch, taller than ever. Not because he'd won a battle against an HOA president, but because his community had seen the truth. Respect can't be demanded. It must be earned. And that day, Paula learned the difference.